Greetings. Do without wilt shall be the whole of the law. I'm Lexi Eve, and welcome back to another Magic in Theory and Practice video. So we're nearing the end of Book 3 of Liber Abba, and I find that really exciting. Today's video is going to be on Chapter 20 of the Eucharist and of the Art of Alchemy. Just real quick before we get to the chapter and going into my script, I just want to make another mention, and I'll do this probably almost every video I post now through the spring equinox. If this channel gets to 1,000 subscribers by the time the equinox hits, and that's March 19th, I believe 11:06 p.m. is the exact equinox. So if we get up to 1,000 subscribers, I'm going to be giving away for free a Stele of Revealing replica in 1/3 scale. I make these by hand. I cut wood, I sand it. I use plaster rather than stucco, as they would have used in Egypt. I let that dry, I sand it to shape, and then I hand paint every detail on it. So what I'm going to do is, if we get to 1,000, the video I post right after the equinox, whoever leaves comments, I will take all the names of every person who comments on that video. I'll put them in like a bag or a hat or something, and I'll make a video live where I draw one name out of that lot of people who commented, and whoever I choose will get the Stele of Revealing replica that I make from scratch. It'll be completely free of charge with free shipping. So share my channel. Hit the like buttons, do the things. Make sure you get this word out. Help me grow the channel. I don't make money off of this channel. I do this strictly out of service. And I figure the more people that see these videos, the more people engaging in Thelema. I try to keep this conversation educational, but also I'm enthusiastic about it, and I want to share that enthusiasm. So the more people are enthusiastic about what we're doing on this channel, the more Thelema is growing in a healthy manner, I feel. So that's why I want to grow the channel. It's not for me about making money off of this. Should I get to 100,000 subscribers, I'm still not going to monetize the channel. You know, so whether there's one person or 1,000 is kind of irrelevant. I'm just looking to help whoever I can help with this information. So share the channel around, and yeah, you may get a free stele if you're interested in that. So let's dive in, shall we, to Chapter 20 of the Eucharist and the Art of Alchemy. So the chapter has two sections covering the two topics of the title, each in their own section. Thus, we begin first with the Eucharist. In the Thelemic ritual, one of the most important foundational tendencies is to employ an epiclesis, the consecration of a Eucharist, to endow it with the divine light. Crowley describes it very simply in this chapter, quote, "It consists in taking common things, transmuting them into divine things, and consuming them." End quote. Further, quote, "The reabsorption of the force is a kind of consumption, but it has more restricted application as follows. Take a substance symbolic of the whole course of nature, make it a god, and consume it." End quote. In many rituals, one casts images made of astral light and divine light within their temple. After the climax of the ritual, in most cases, it is mandatory that the light present be reabsorbed into the magician. The epiclesis can fulfill that function by absorbing the energy present from the ritual, and then that Eucharist is consumed, bringing the light of the temple within it and then into the magician. Crowley writes, quote, "The highest form of the Eucharist is that in which the element consecrated is one. It is one substance and not two, not living and not dead, neither liquid nor solid, neither hot nor cold, neither male nor female." End quote. This refers to the light of the highest being brought through the union of the priest and priestess, thus mixing and transcending division of polarity, such as is done in the Gnostic Mass, or even better, when you mix sexual fluids which are consumed after sex magic. Those fluids can be considered an epiclesis, as they and the sex act are both sacraments in and of themselves. Now, mind you, simply consuming sexual fluids is not enough. You have to charge them, you have to know how to work with light, and you have to know how to work with these fluids. If you're just consuming them, you're taking in that energy, but you're not doing anything with it. You have to actually consecrate those materials, then consume them with specific intentions, with specific will. You have to know how to do a lot of that stuff. For that, you really need a teacher. You can listen to my other videos on sex magic. I talk about a lot of that. Quote, "This sacrament is secret in every respect, For those who may be worthy, although not officially recognized as such, this Eucharist has been described in detail and without concealment somewhere in the published writings of the Master Darian, but he has told no one where. It is reserved for the highest initiates and is synonymous with the accomplished work on the material plane. It is the medicine of metals, the stone of the wise, the potable gold, the elixir of life that is consumed therein. The altar is the bosom of Isis, the eternal mother. The chalice is the cup of Our Lady Babylon herself. The wand is that which was and is to come. The Eucharist of two elements has its matter of the passives. The wafer, which is a pantacle of corn, typical of earth. The wine, a cup, represents water. There are certain other attributions. The wafer is the sun, for instance, and the wine is appropriate to Bacchus. The wafer may, however, be more complex, the cake of light, as described in Liber Legis. End quote. So before we get to the rest of the chapter, I want to just cover what the Eucharist and wine are, especially before and now in the New Aeon, and then cover transubstantiation. So, in Christianity, the bread and wine were transformed in the Last Supper into symbolic representations of the body and blood of Jesus Christ. They were endowed with the power of God the Father and changed. So those who consume them are partaking of God's power, and thus affirming their belief in Jesus as the Son of God, the Savior of the world. They are not physically changed, but spiritually. They are taking on the light of the monotheistic God as the creator of the universe and mankind. So what does this have to do with the Lima? Well, nothing really. Only that the ritual consumption of bread and wine date back much further than Christianity, and it is in the egregore of transubstantiation where we draw the power of the cake of light for Thelemites today. In Christianity, the bread is unleavened, meaning there is no yeast, so it is baked and remains a thin, flat wafer. The command to consume this type of bread in Christianity actually comes from the Jewish faith, specifically commanded in Exodus chapter 12, verse 18, quote, "In the first month, on the 14th day of the month at evening, you shall eat unleavened bread until the 21st day of the month at evening." End quote. Thus it became traditional for the Jews to eat matzah due to the reminder of Passover. Thus, for them, it symbolizes freedom from slavery under the Egyptians. The Christians adopted this practice with a slightly different formula to make the wafer used in Christian masses. In the Lima, however, our bread is called a cake of light. Its recipe is found in the Book of the Law, chapter 3, 23 to 25. Quote, "For perfume, mix meal and honey and thick leavings of red wine, then oil of aubermelon and olive oil, and afterward soften and smooth down with rich, fresh blood. The best blood is of the moon monthly, then the fresh blood of a child, or dropping from the host of heaven, then of enemies, then of the priest or of the worshippers, last of some beast, no matter what. This burn, of this make cakes and eat unto me. This hath also another use. Let it be laid before me and kept thick with the perfumes of your orison. It shall be full of beetles, as it were, and creeping things sacred unto me." End quote. Cakes of light are basically flour or meal, which is just a thicker form of flour, usually corn-based, but flour suffices. Also, boiled down port into a syrup, or leavings of red wine, if you could get them, or even cream of tartar instead of port. Honey, blood, and aubermelon oil. And I have to pause to give a huge thank you to Kim M. from the Bay Area, who was generous enough to reach out and mail me a jar of red wine leavings. So fuck yeah, thank you, Kim. It's really appreciated. A huge portion of our cakes of light here at home go to serving the congregation of the Lamp of Invisible Light. So you're helping increase the quality of our rituals for a lot of people, both new and who have been around the Lima a long time. So thank you. Now, while writing this script, it occurred to me that the ingredients correspond possibly with Earth via the flour, Venus via the port and honey, Prana via the blood, and the sun via the aubermelon oil, which has olive, cinnamon, and galangal, which is like a ginger, both of the latter being spicy, and solar, both cinnamon and galangal. Writing about it in this way, it occurs to me that the Sol ingredients represent the word thelema, will. Venus ingredients represent agape, love. The prana, spirit. and the earth upon which these former things take place. So basically, doing your will, the uniting of opposites of two different things to create a third thing, the act of magic, which has to be done upon physical matter. Also, you need spirit. Inanimate objects which lack the ego to consciously move around and think and do things, they lack that certain essence of will which humans have. So there's something very interesting about that formula. Robert Flores from California shared a quote with me from Sabazius proposing the idea that, quote, aside from the reflected Mercury dwelling therein, the host is composed of 5 sub-elements, which are our 5 elements: meal, prithivi, honey, vayu, oil, apas, oil of abramelin, tejas, or tejas, and red oil, akasha, end quote. Now, I don't know his reasoning behind these associations, but concerning cakes, I figure it's food for thought. And yeah, sorry for the cheap pun. The cup of wine or beer has been used for ages as a libation. It is no longer the blood of Christ that was spilled to save sinners after his crucifixion. Now, the cup is the holy grail of Babylon, the sacred yoni, and the wine, by the divine light, becomes representative of the blood of the saints, the ego spilled upon crossing the abyss into the grail. Basically, one solar life force, their ego, changing them from one into the many. What made them individual is being absorbed into the all. They are no longer individual at that point. That's what the wine represents, the mixing of the one with the many. Much more could be said about the Grail, but I've already given a lengthy expose in my Sex Magic Part 2 video about this very concept, so see that video. So, now we have a clear understanding of the sacraments of Thelema, at least the most common ones. So let's continue with the chapter at hand. The cake of light, quote, is used in the exoteric Mass of the Phoenix, Liber 33, chapter 44, mixed with the blood of the magus. This Mass should be performed daily at sunset by every magician, end quote. So I realize we have not gone over the Mass of the Phoenix, but I'm sure many of you are familiar with it. It's a solitary equivalent of the Gnostic Mass performed at sunset facing west, the direction symbolic of death. The magician undergoes a symbolic death and rebirth themselves, ending the ritual revitalized and born anew like the phoenix. And so I actually have a script ready, and as soon as I record this video, I'm actually going to record that video, and I'll probably post it either tomorrow or the next day. On the usual sacraments, quote, corn and wine are equivalent to flesh and blood, but it is easier to convert live substances into the body and blood of God than to perform this miracle upon dead matter, end quote. Thus, the bodily fluids, which are composed of live cells, already have specific energies flowing through them and are easier to change by acting upon that divine light within them. Also, corn is used by the Aztecs. I'm not sure other tribes or cultures from the Americas way back when, but for sure the Aztecs, they believe instead of being made from clay, man was made from corn. So there's a big symbolic connection there with the Book of the Law. Then Crowley's going to go over in this chapter the ritualistic use of 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, which is the same as 1, element Eucharist. So Eucharist containing more than 2. Quote, the Eucharist of 3 elements has for basis the symbols of the 3 gunas. For Tamas, darkness, take opium or nightshade or some sleepy medicine. For Rajas, activity, take strychnine or other excitant. For Sattvas, calm, the cakes of light may again be suitable, end quote. In my opinion, nicotine would be a good drug to use in place of the cake for Sattvas. Nicotine, as tobacco, is listed in the magician's tables on the path of Lamed. It's also the incense of Gebora. In my experience, smoking or otherwise ingesting nicotine causes restriction of the blood vessels, sending a small surge of adrenaline and euphoria through the bloodstream, followed by a crash and relaxation. If one is extremely anxious, smoking calms them down. If one is extremely sluggish, smoking gives a boost of energy. Either way, the first immediate effect is followed by a balanced state afterward. It's no coincidence that those who take either opiates or cocaine enjoy smoking right after ingesting. It has calming effects after cocaine, and after opiates, a stimulating effect. So it's very balancing So I would put that in place of the cakes of light, the sattvas. Quote, the Eucharist of 4 elements consists of fire, air, water, and earth. These are represented by a flame for fire, by incense or roses for air, by wine for water, and by bread and salt for earth, end quote. As part of the magical system that I was trained under by my teacher, our first grade is marked by a ritual using the physical representations of 4 elements to draw 4 sets of elemental pentagrams around the circle, and we use the parts of the soul to charge the pentagrams. We then disrobe and draw the spirit pentagrams with the sign of the ficus, linking the taking off of the outer robe of concealment with the removal of flesh, leaving pure spirit. It is a ritualistic communion with the elements on the level of the soul. Quote, the Eucharist of 5 has for basis wine for taste, a rose for smell, a flame for sight, a bell for sound, and a dagger for touch. This sacrament is implied in the Mass of the Phoenix in a slightly different form, end quote. Note that the 5 senses are associated with the 5 elements thusly. Smell is air, sight is fire, taste is water, touch is earth, and hearing is spirit. Quote, the Eucharist of 6 elements has Father, Son, and Holy Spirit above, breath, water, and blood beneath. It is a sacrament reserved for high initiates, end quote. I have no commentary on this grouping, but thankfully there is a footnote here that says, quote, the lance and the grail are firstly dedicated to the Holy Spirit of life in silence. The bread and wine are then fermented and manifested by vibration and received by the Virgin Mother. The elements are then intermingled and consumed by the epiphany of Iacchus, when countenance beholdeth countenance, end quote. On this channel, I have talked a lot about what the next couple of paragraphs say, so I'm just going to quote them and move on. Quote, the Eucharist of 7 elements is mystically identical with that of the one. Of the method of consecrating the elements, it is only necessary to say that they should be treated as talismans. The circle and other furniture of the temple should receive the usual benefit of the banishings and consecrations. The oath should be taken and the invocations made. When the divine force manifests in the elements, they should be solemnly consumed. There is also a simpler method of consecration reserved for initiates of high rank, of which it is here unlawful to speak. According to the nature of the sacrament, so will its results be. In some, one may receive a mystic grace, culminating in samadhi. In others, a simpler and more material benefit may be obtained. The highest sacrament, that of the one element, is universal in its operation. According to the declared purpose of the work, so will the result be. It is a universal key of all magic. These secrets are of supreme practical importance and are guarded in the sanctuary with a 2-edged sword flaming every way. And a footnote, quote, J.K. Hussmans, who was afraid of them and tried to betray the little he knew of them, became a papist and died of cancer of the tongue. For this sacrament is the tree of life itself, and whoso partaketh of the fruit thereof shall never die unless he so will. And another footnote to that reads, the use of the elixir of life is only justifiable in peculiar circumstances. To go counter to the course of natural change is to approximate perilously to the error of the Black Brothers, end quote. Here we come to a very interesting subject, eternal life. Quote, who would not rather work through incarnation, a real renewal of body and brain, than content himself with a stagnant immortality upon this mote in the sunlight of the universe which we call Earth, end quote. So life operates as it should. If we were meant to live in these bodies that we have now forever, we'd either have evolved to live longer or else have figured out a way to prolong life indefinitely. We were not and we have not. It is a mistake to think that the elixir of life makes one's body live forever. Rather, by learning how to work with it and properly use it, one can learn Gnostic truths of existence deeper than any physical science has gone so far. It also increases vitality and the magical properties that are able to be used by a knowledgeable magician in too many ways to list now. As for the soul, yes, I lean towards reincarnation and have seen several glimpses of past lives. Living forever does not have the variety of experience granted by living many lives. Concerning the making of the elixir, quote, it is of more importance than any other magical ceremony because it is a complete circle. The whole of the force expended is completely reabsorbed. Yet the virtue is that vast gain represented by the abyss between man and God, End quote. Being a Thelemite, one should have as their primary goal union with the divine. Everything they do should work towards this union, and that most assuredly includes sex, the most holy sacrament, along with the elixir. Quote, "The magician becomes filled with God, fed upon God, intoxicated with God. Little by little, his body will become purified by the internal lustration of God. Day by day, his mortal frame, shedding its earthly elements, will become in very truth the temple of the Holy Ghost. Day by day, matter is replaced by spirit, the human by the divine. Ultimately, the change will be complete. God manifest in flesh will be his name." End quote. This section, stating that, quote, "To a magician thus renewed, the attainment of knowledge and conversation of the holy guardian angel becomes an inevitable task," confirms what I just said a moment ago. And now we move on to section 2, alchemy. While alchemy is a science of a chemical nature, in a lab mixing ingredients under heat and sometimes pressure to extract chemicals with certain liquids, it is more so a science of the soul. In this section, Crowley writes, quote, "We do not propose to discuss any of the actual processes. Most readers will already be aware that the main objects of alchemy were the philosopher's stone, the medicine of metals, and various tinctures and elixirs possessing divers virtues, in particular those of healing disease, extending the lifespan, and increasing human abilities, perfecting the nature of man in every respect, conferring magical powers, and transmuting material substances, especially metals, into more valuable forms." End quote. So for full disclosure, my experience with chemical alchemy is really quite limited. Truthfully, I have only experience with alchemy of bodily fluids, sometimes mixed with abramelin oil, sometimes other things. And aside from sexual alchemy, I once took a one-day class on making a 40-day lemongrass Spagyric, and though I did enjoy the process, I never sought out making anything else. In short, the process was this. When ingested, lemongrass is used for clarity, communication, balance, protection, reducing inflammation, anxiety, and joint pain. Its association is with Mercury. On a Wednesday, the day of Mercury, in the hour of Mercury, I mixed about 8 grams of lemongrass into a small hermetically sealable jar, containing 40% ethyl alcohol. I shook the mixture, meditating upon its properties, uses, but most especially its association with Mercury. This is the salt phase of the operation, salt being associated with the element water and Bina. For the next 40 days, I was instructed to shake it for about 8 minutes a day at the exact hour of Mercury, all the while meditating upon its properties and especially Mercury. I followed through. By the end of the 40 days, the alcohol went from clear to black, and at this point, the lemongrass was now dead. This is the phase of the Spagyric called the Negrito or Black Dragon. On the next day of Mercury, in the hour of Mercury, I used cheesecloth to strain out the lemongrass, squeezing out as much liquid or moisture as possible. This vegetable matter was then burnt on a high flame in an iron pan. I had to use a strong exhaust fan, as while it burns, it lets off a nasty smoke. After some time on high flame, the lemongrass is mixed until it burns completely, leaving just the fine ash. This is the sulfur phase associated with fire and chakma. The ash is recollected and moved back into the negrito and shook up for 8 minutes. For the next 8 days is more shaking and meditating, trying to connect the Spagyric spiritual essence with my own soul. During this time, the alchemical salt of the ash is extracted into the liquid. After 8 days, the ash is filtered out, in which you're actually extracting the salt from the ash. So you filter out the ash again, and this is the final product, the lemongrass Spagyric. This is the Mercury phase, associated with air and Kether, the result of the salt and fire phases. So it's air, it's the union of the fire and water, it's the final product, Kether. This is one simple alchemical experiment, but it could get much more complex. Like I said, I never pursued the art, though I did find it very energetic, and I enjoy connecting, especially with the planetary aspects of the vegetable. You know, I'm almost saddened that I haven't pursued anything along these lines, because when I was new to the occult, I really wanted to pursue the use of herbs and tinctures, like something akin to what you would call green witchcraft. Unfortunately, living in the city, I don't have the space to grow herbs, and I never bought any from any shops in Manhattan, though there are a few great places that have large selections. But they tend to be dried out and preserved rather than fresh, and I don't know, I just didn't connect with that, and I've been so busy with other areas of initiation and, path working and grade work, and so I just never had the time. I just never pursued it, never made it a goal, never made time for it. So maybe one day I will, but that's not happened yet. Towards the beginning of this section of the chapter, Crowley writes, quote, "Let it suffice to say that the word alchemy is an Arabic term consisting of the article el and the adjective chemi, which means that which pertains to Egypt. A rough translation would be the Egyptian matter. The assumption is that the Mohammedan grammarians held traditionally that the art was derived from that wisdom of the Egyptians, which was the boast of Moses, Plato, and Pythagoras, and the source of their illumination." End quote. Also, according to Webster Dictionary, the etymology of the word is, quote, Middle English alchemy, borrowed from Anglo-French and medieval Latin. Anglo-French alchemy, Middle French, also ALQ alchemy, and ARQ, archemy, borrowed from medieval Latin alchemia, which means the transmutation of base metals into gold, the philosopher's stone, borrowed from Arabic alchemia, from the the, plus chemia, art of transmuting base metals. This is borrowed perhaps via Syriac chemia, from late Greek chemia, of uncertain origin. End quote. Also, Webster quotes Jean-Francois Champollion, quote, "Egypt, moreover, which has the blackest soils, they call by the same name as the black portion of the eye, chemia. This word is clearly adapted from the Coptic name for Egypt, Chemi, a descendant of ancient Egypt, KMT, a name for the Nile Valley, taken to be a derivative of KM, black, chem." End quote. Yeah, I suggest studying Egyptology, which we'll not be getting into today, as there are plenty of magical practices which could be considered alchemical. Though when I think of alchemy, my mind goes straight to Prague in the 15 and 1600s. There, the peak of alchemy occurred, and there are still historical labs preserved and kept just as they were when they were found for tourists to ponder over. Quote, "Modern research by profane scholars leaves it still doubtful as to whether alchemical treaties should be classified as mystical, magical, medical, or chemical. The most reasonable opinion is that all these objects form the preoccupation of the alchemist in varying proportions. Hermes is alike the god of wisdom, thaumaturgy, therapeutics, and physical science. All these may consequently claim the title Hermetic. It cannot be doubted that such writers as Flood aspired to spiritual perfection. It is equally sure that Edward Kelly wrote primarily from the point of view of a magician, that Paracelsus applied himself to the cure of disease and the prolongation of life as the first consideration, although his greatest achievement seemed to modern thinkers to have been rather his discoveries of opium, zinc, and hydrogen, so that we tend to think of him as a chemist no less than we do of von Helmont, whose conception of gas ranks him as one of those rare geniuses who have increased human knowledge by a fundamentally important idea." End quote. In my opinion, alchemy encompasses all of the aforementioned titles: magical, mystical, medical, and chemical, for sure. It has magical properties when used to change mood by ingestion or cure some ailment. It's also a magical process to create a Spagyric or tincture. Mystical, as it requires deliberation and contemplation. Sometimes meditating on how to reach an end goal is mandatory, not to mention the patience and precision of mixing chemicals, which can induce a trance state from meditating while you're doing it. Chemical, yes, obviously, for it is the basis of chemistry today. And medical, also yes, as it was used to make treatments for conditions that would not heal otherwise. Though the average person who knows nothing about alchemy probably thinks it was a quack pseudoscience, pharmacology today owes its existence to alchemy as its precursor. And even today, there are ailments which only can be healed by acting directly upon the soul or energy centers of the physical body. So alchemy has its uses still today. Though, of course, if you are sick, first I recommend go seeing a regular doctor, as medicine is much more reliable today than alchemy is. Not to mention there are not many great alchemists alive today. Quote, "The literature of alchemy is immense. Practically all of it is wholly or partially unintelligible. Its treatises, from the Metzareth of the Hebrews to the Chariot of Antimony, are deliberately couched in hieratic riddles. Ecclesiastical persecution and the profanation of the secrets of power were equally dreaded. Worse still, from our point of view, this motive induced writers to insert intentionally misleading statements, the more deeply to bedevil unworthy pretenders to their mysteries." End quote. So whether thinking of the Hermeticum Theatricum or Nicholas Flamel's Philosopher's Stone, it is impossible to make headway into what they are talking about, as everything is coded, and usually you need keys, but even if you possess them, there are sure to be misleading instructions or outright lies, as Crowley indicated. There is, of course, such books as Agape, vel Liber Si, vel Azoth. But, truthfully, you need a teacher if you plan to actually take up alchemy as a serious practitioner of the art. It's way too easy to go about it alone and end up poisoning yourself. I've met people that even though they've done it right for so many years, they've actually burnt out their taste receptors from ingesting chemicals. It's part of that process, so it could be dangerous. But for books that actually illuminate the subject, I recommend looking into Brian Cotnor. He's a rare gem in the alchemical community today, and a link to a list of his books available for purchase is in the description below. Now, despite the riddles that alchemy is cloaked behind, Crowley writes that it is equivalent to magic. Let me quote, "Beneath this diversity we may perceive an obscure identity. They all begin with the substance in nature, which is described as existing almost everywhere, and as universally esteemed of no value. The alchemist is, in all cases, to take this substance and subject it to a series of operations. By doing so, he obtains his product. This product, however named or described, is always a substance which represents the truth or perfection of the original first matter, and its qualities are invariably such as pertain to a living being, not to an inanimate mass. In a word, the alchemist is to take a dead thing, impure, valueless, and powerless, and transform it into a live thing, active, invaluable, and thaumaturgic. The reader of this book will surely find this is a most striking analogy with what we have already said of the process of magic. What, by our definition, is initiation? The first matter is a man, that is to say, a perishable parasite, bred of the earth's crust, crawling irritably upon it for a span, and at last returning to the dirt whence he sprang. The process of initiation consists in removing his impurities, and finding in his true self an immortal intelligence to whom matter is no more than the means of manifestation. The initiate is eternally individual. He is ineffable, incorruptible, immune from everything. He possesses infinite wisdom and infinite power in himself. This equation is identical with that of a talisman. The magician takes an idea, purifies it, intensifies it by invoking into it the inspiration of his soul. It is no longer a scrawl scratched on a sheepskin, but a word of truth, imperishable, mighty to prevail throughout the sphere of its purport. The evocation of a spirit is precisely similar in essence. The exorcist takes dead material substances of a nature sympathetic to the being whom he intends to invoke. He banishes all impurities therefrom, prevents all interference therewith, and proceeds to give life to the subtle substance thus prepared by instilling his soul." End quote. Now, we at last come to the Sumon Bonum of alchemy, the transmutation of lead into gold. So what does this actually mean? Is it referring to the physical metals, or something else, perhaps that of the soul? Well, in essence, both. It has been proven in the lab that by taking out certain particles and replacing them with others, it is possible to take one base element and turn it into another. In most cases, this is done by particle acceleration. Particles are in fact removed and replaced with others, but the process is expensive, and to make a significant amount of gold from lead would cost way more than the price of the end product. It is also possible to place lead in a specific chemical and introduce silver, which turns the lead to a lighter color. Then, taking the silver lead and placing it in a fresh chemical Then introducing gold, the lead takes on the golden hue. It in fact looks like gold in every way, but when tested chemically is still lead, only changed in color. So I have a link in the description from a YouTube channel called Nile Red if you want to see how he uses sulfuric acid and I think potassium nitrate to turn lead into a golden color. But that process it's still lead. It's just changing the outward color of it. When, however, we refer to the soul when thinking of turning lead into gold, we arrive at the process of initiation through the planetary Sephiroth. Beginning with the lead in Malkuth, the soul is in a state of density and low vibration. One does their grade work, ascending the tree of life and activating the paths that connect the Sephiroth in between initiations. They go through a model of incorporating all of the characteristics of each sphere. Their soul or body of light is exposed to forces which change it. It takes on all the characteristics of each alchemical metal in turn. In Yesod, Luna, silver, the lead is lightened or changed to that of the white of raw silver. One embraces feminine aspects of the moon, delves the unconscious recesses of their mind and body. In Hod, Mercury, the silver is exposed to quicksilver, a liquid metal synonymous with the speed of Hermes, able to adapt to its surroundings like water does to the shape of its vessel. Quicksilver corresponds with all things intellectual. Study and jnana yoga is the primary focus. Next, the soul goes through Netzach, Venus, and is exposed to copper, a bright orange-brown, synonymous with love and union. Even though Tifereth is next and soul corresponds with gold, it is not until one crosses the abyss that they actually attain to what would be called turning the lead into gold. In Tifereth, the alchemist seeks union with their HGA, but think of it as a mixing of all the previous metals into one. Almost like a lesser form of Electricum Magicum, which is a mixed metal containing the 7 alchemical metals. In Gebora, or really quick on Tifereth, you could even think of that as like a Negredo phase, where the base matter turns black and dies, and then is going to be reborn later on. In Gebora, the soul is exposed to iron. It takes on a strength capable of smithing and sharpening like a sword. In Chesed, Jupiter, the soul is exposed to tin, taking on a softer state. Though tin, when mixed with most metals, makes them less susceptible to corrosion. So in Gebora, you're obviously taking on a very fiery masculine aspect, and in Chesed, you're taking on a more wise leadership aspect, very intellectual as well, but more in a philosophical way of contemplation, which is why most bishops of most orders, that corresponds with Jupiter. Finally, should one cross the abyss, they end up first in Binah, Saturn. This again corresponds with lead, but now that lead has been changed. The base matter is still the base matter, but it has experience. It could be argued that in Chakma, since the zodiac each correspond with one of the 7 planets, this lead with experience in Binah then goes through a whole process a second time all at once. Finally, should one survive this second smelting phase, they indeed end up ipsissimis in Kether, true gold. Nothing could be said about this state. Now, there's also a second alchemical process associated with crossing the abyss and attaining grades in the supernal realm. It comes back to that Spagyric I spoke of earlier. In the abyss, the candidate is the first mixing of vegetable matter with the alcohol. They reach Binah and complete the salt phase by quote-unquote dying in the abyss and being reduced to dust by the desert sun that the angels of the wind collect and sweep past the demon 333, leaving this pile of dust in the city of pyramids. This is the first filtration and the squeezing of the vegetable in the cloth, removing it from the Negredo. This dust is taken and reduced to a fine ash by extreme heat. This ash is again collected and placed in the urn in Chakma. This is the phase of sulfur, the second phase. Finally, from this ash, like a phoenix, the initiate who is burnt down to ash by flame arises reborn in Kether. This is the Mercury phase, the completion of the great work. For more on this process, read The Temple of Solomon the King, Liber 73, The Urn, and The Fox in the Balkans. You could also go to The Vision and the Voice for some more information as well, especially I don't know if you want to say the higher or lower numbered aethers. like everything past 10, from 10 to 1. Just like the Tao Te of Lao Tzu, Crowley writes that concerning alchemy, quote, "Let us emphasize the fact that the final product is in all cases a living being. The elixir of life will similarly consist of a living organism capable of growth at the expense of its environment, and of such a nature that its true will is to cause that environment to serve as its means of expression in the physical world of human life. The universal medicine will be a menstruum of such subtlety as to be able to penetrate all matter and transmute it in the sense of its own tendency, while of such impartial purity as to accept perfectly the impression of the will of the alchemist. This substance, properly prepared and properly charged, is able to perform all things soever that are physically possible, within the limits of its proportions, of its momentum, to the inertia of the object to which it is applied." End quote. So that ends it for today's video. Love is the law, love under will. I'll see you in the next one, the Mass of the Phoenix.